This week we're looking at best hurling hardmen in association with 65 Hurls. Go to 65hurls.com to get your hurleys. Michael Verney, who comes to mind when you think traditionally of the hurling hardmen? Before we get to today's ones, who comes to mind?
Well, I think you could look at any clip from the 80s or 90s in particular and find an awful lot of hardmen, because hurling was played in kind of a different manner. But like in relatively recent terms, probably the likes of Ollie Baker and Colin Lynch maybe from Clare, enforcers in the middle of the field, Kevin Keenan from Offaly in the 90s, Dermot O'Sullivan absolutely poleaxing boys and having Kilkenny boys hop off and still bursting out with balls. Of course, that great point he got against Limerick back in the day, I think it was in 01, where he knocked one of the Foley's into the middle of next week and then put the ball over the bar. That's probably the type of thing you're thinking of. And I suppose Johnny Marr from Loughrea probably springs to mind as well. That iconic clip from the county final against Thomas's where he nearly took out the whole Thomas's team. Mike Houlihan from Limerick as well. Ger Hegarty, those sort of boys, real enforcers, without being smart, real tough nuts it was so hard to get the better of them, and they often set the tone for what was going to happen for their team in a game.
Yeah, I give Greg Kennedy a nod here. He's now the Dublin selector, of course, played for Galway in the past, and Loughrea alongside Johnny Maher. Geez, the Johnny Maher one, and I think people will probably remember where he goes around, he wins a penalty, he flicks one lad, then he dunks another lad and gets away with it and goes off and buries the penalty.
And trips up a lad after he scores the penalty as well.
And rightly so. Because, do you know why rightly so? Because they'd let him get away with it at that stage so much, they nearly deserve another boot for it. You can't let a lad get away with that much. He should have been absolutely mauled. Now, I'm not preaching violence here or anything, you know that. But in fairness, you can't let a lad walk all over you. You just can't.
No, and just with these hard men as well, I suppose it's a case of if a team can stand up to them and get the better of them, like just say we'll probably talk about maybe someone like Paddy Maher. Just say Kilkenny take on Paddy Maher and get the better of him, like when didn't Joe leave Paddy on his arse in an All-Ireland semi-final one year, and then didn't Paddy leave Joe on his arse the year after?
No, well, I think it was more to do with Paddy burst Joe Canning on the sideline in 2016, and then in 2017 Paddy went to hit Grode McInerney and Paddy ended up on the ground, and I think Galway felt that was a big, like that was a very significant moment, that was kind of them saying, we're going to stand up to your hardest sort of player, and they felt that they got a lot of energy from that. Just a couple other ones. I mean, some of these are players that of course we wouldn't have seen. The Rock, as you mentioned, is Mick Mackey. He would have always been thought of as a great hard man back in the Limerick days, many moons ago now. Liam Dunn back in the 90s, I'd say he'd take man ball the whole lot. Pa Dillon, heard plenty of stories about him, that he was a fair enforcer, and that he was one of the reasons that Kilkenny went from sort of shying away from Tipperary physically to being able to stand up to them back in maybe the 60s, that sort of era. And John Doyle, one of those Tipperary enforcers from back in the day. But there's any amount of them, and we absolutely encourage comments in to let us know who you think, both historically and presently, who are the hurling hardmen. So
on that as well, Shane, when you play in a line that's called Hell's Kitchen, yeah, you definitely deserve to be talked about as one of the biggest hurling hardmen of all time. You mentioned a couple there of tip ones. Paddy Malloy recently passed away from Offaly. He would have been. I told a story on this about how tough he was, and Paddy Spellman from Rhinus would be another one from Offaly there. But we've any amount of them even now. The game has changed, but you still need that bit of toughness. You still need that enforcer.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Rattler Byrne, because the ball would come in and he'd be roaring, rattle him, which is it's great to even think of someone saying that in the middle of the square. Right, we'll move on to today's players. Where do you want to start? I think it's worth starting in Limerick. Strangely enough, we didn't actually come up with a huge amount of contenders for hardmen here, but one that's probably going to be right there at the in the overall conversation at the end has to be Will O'Donoghue, because he'd ate you without salt on the field.
Yeah, and it's amazing, like Will O'Donoghue hasn't been around that long. He was obviously involved in the Pearshig's All-Ireland club success, but he's kind of burst on the scene in the last maybe 18 months or that, and he's left a fairly lasting impact. I think he's the sort of player that could dominate at midfield for Limerick for the next 6 or 7 years. I think he could dominate and be one of the best midfielders in the country. He's just he's just unbelievably tough, gets in those big hits, gets in those big turnovers, tends to set the tone, tends to make things happen for Limerick around the engine room. I definitely think he's going to be a mainstay of their team over the next 6 or 7 years. Another one I kind of thought as well was Seamus Flanagan. Again, on and off the team a small bit, but in 2018 when they did make the breakthrough, that big hit on Gerard McInerney in the first half. We talked about Gerard McInerney, getting a big hit on Paddy Maher. Imagine the energy that Limerick got from Seamus Flanagan knocking down Gerard McInerney and then being able to set up a goal. I think it was their first goal for Graham Mulcahy that day as well. So while he's not always on the team, Flanagan's definitely another one that would come into that. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit even about Tom Morrissey as well.
Yeah, I think he's a very hardy player and puts himself through the world of hardship over the course of the game. And like a lot of these Limerick guys, they're 6 foot plus, they're absolute tanks. Does that necessarily mean that they're a hard man? Like they are able to put themselves through hardship, and you don't win hurling All-Irelands without doing that. But is there a difference between someone who's very physical and someone who's a hard man and going to lay down the law? Because I feel like Will O'Donoghu's the one who's actually going to go out and be a real enforcer, and I think that's slightly different to the rest of them who are really able to take care of themselves.
There's a massive difference. Like I'll give an example. Sean Ryan, that plays with Burke and used to play with Offaly there, he's 5 foot nothing, and he would be getting.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, and he'd be the one that would be delivering the big shoulders. I remember we played football for Offaly even as well. He wrote off one of the Fermanagh lads in the challenge game with shoulder. I think he broke Jerry Healy's ribs against Kilconrock with shoulder as well. You don't have to be 6'4". You can. It's more kind of the power of the punch you pack rather than the actual size that you are. It helps if you're 6'4" because obviously you're going to have more force, but I don't necessarily think that. And even some of the lads that will come down to here that'll probably be in the heat of the hunt here will probably be 6 foot ish.
Yeah.
If you're 6'4" and you're able to be a hard man, all the better. But you don't necessarily need to be a monster of a man to be a hard man.
And you know what? Some lads who grow up being big at a young age, so let's say you're 14 and you're 5'10" or whatever, they're not necessarily the lads who are going to be physical when they're senior players, because in some cases they're so big out in the field when they're young that they never actually have to hit anyone or learn to hit anyone. They're almost too small to be hitting them. They're probably afraid of actually hurting fellow players. It's the small little lad who's a little tiger when he's young. He has to hit everyone to even get in at the ball, and he's learned that skill of being aggressive when he was small, and then when he shoots up at age 18 all the way through the rest of his adult life, he's actually probably able to hit better than the other lads.
Yeah, but he's used to probably being bullied on the pitch growing up, like, if you know what I mean, being physically bullied. So he had to stand up and probably had to fight his corner. So yeah, I 100% go with that. Just like probably sticking with some of the Munster counties. Kind of went through like in Tipperary. There's definitely a couple of obvious candidates. The worker bees that we always talk about, the likes of Dan McCormack and Bonner Matter, would definitely come into this category. Again, they're not 6'4" or anything like that, but they're real tough physical types. Really get stuck in. Good under a high ball. Good in around the ruck. Good at getting their bodies in. Paddy Matter would definitely have to come into it as well. He's so physically strong. I know it's probably not the same maybe natural strength that lads would have had in the 80s or 90s. He's probably maybe a bit more gym strong, but he's such a powerhouse when he gets the ball. Like when Paddy Matter gets the ball, it's rarely taken off him, or he's rarely in like pushed into a position physically where he can't strike the ball. He's always able to break the tackle. His first option is always to break the tackle because he has the physical strength to do that. And as we said, that big hit on Joe in the All-Ireland semi-final, and many other big hits and many other big catches in the air over the likes of Waddy Walsh in the 16 final and that. I think he'd definitely have to be right up there.
It's interesting. I would consider Cathal Barrett a hardy player and like very physical, the same way that I'd look at Sean Finn and think that with Limerick, and maybe even Mike Casey. But again, it comes back to a difference with the enforcer. Not only like Paddy Maher and as we've mentioned, Will O'Donoghue, they're not just going to hold their own. They're going to send the team the other way. They're going to physically beat up the other team with the physical pressure they put on them. Interesting then that we came to Waterford and also Laois, and we struggled to actually name anybody that we think would fit into this category. Yeah,
it's funny you mentioned there, Barrett is what I probably define as abrasive, very, very abrasive, very, very in your face. Is he a hard man necessarily? He is a type of one, but maybe not in your traditional sense, but very, very abrasive. We went down through Waterford and struggled to find one. To be honest with you, we didn't just name one for the sake of it. We went down through it and couldn't really find one. And maybe that's leading into one of the reasons why teams were putting up big scores on them last year. Maybe there wasn't enough kind of physical contact, there wasn't enough kind of big hits, and I know that's something that Liam Cahill will be looking to rectify this year. Same with Laois. Obviously wouldn't have seen maybe as much of Laois as Waterford, and maybe if someone wants to contradict us and put a few Laois lads into the mix, or someone wants to put a few Waterford lads into the mix, more than welcome. But we didn't think anybody obviously stood out from either of those counties.
And I don't think even with Clare, we looked at David McInerney, and I know he's physical and able to endure all sorts of hardship. Don't know if he always channels it the right way, and if I'd necessarily consider him an enforcer or hard man in the way we're talking about. You also kind of feel that Jack Brown deserves to be in this conversation, which is unusual compared with the likes of Paddy Maher and Will O'Donoghue, because he wouldn't be touching 6 foot now.
No, he'd be much smaller. Again, like Barrett, he'd be very, very abrasive, very in your face. Can go the wrong side in terms of discipline every now and then, and can foul a good bit. But looking back at his best year with Clare in 2018, to me, Jack Brown was an All-Star in 2018. Didn't even get an All-Star nomination. Just a very, very as I was saying, in your face, real abrasive style of defender. Probably maybe a bit of a throwback to old school defenders, which are kind of longer clearances, and maybe that type of the way he approaches his game would be a bit more old school. But I definitely think he's a fairly tough nut.
I think it's worth mentioning a couple of the guys from non Liam McCarthy level counties. Jack Kavanagh, somebody that I've seen plenty of times with St Mullins and Carlow. Now he does, similarly like you're mentioning Jack Brown, sometimes he goes over the line. He's gotten himself red cards on more than one occasion, but he's a fair physical presence around the middle of the field. And you also wanted to touch on Loughlane Gales man Tommy Doyle.
Yeah, Tommy Doyle is the opposite of the small lad we were saying that packs a big punch. Tommy Doyle's about 6'5" or 6'6", but he's not just he's not just a big towering presence at the edge of the square. He doesn't give defenders an inch really, and he makes it very, very tough. There wouldn't be too many attackers that would get down through the spine of the Westmeath defence. Do you know when say a player forward goes through and is going down through a defence or something like that, and he gets absolutely poleaxed, and he maybe gets a free, maybe he doesn't get a free, but the idea or the notion is in his head and in all his teammates' heads that, okay, maybe I won't go down that kind of alley again, and maybe I won't get upended again like that. That's the sort of presence you want with someone in probably the central spine of their defence, and even at midfield. Tommy Doyle definitely brings that with Westmeath. There's a few other counties. I suppose it's probably only natural that we would have, a decent handful with Kilkenny and Galway and even Wexford when you're thinking of big physical teams, when you're thinking of those teams. So there's bound to be a few lads that are going to be fairly hard to manoeuvre.
Whereas Cork, who you like to rag on as often as you can, we didn't come up with too many here. I mean, we'll give Bill Cooper a bit of a mention because I think he's able to look after himself. Whether he is an enforcer is another question. Owen Cadigan also, and to be fair, as much and all as people slate their full back line, Owen Cadigan and Colm Spillane, they're well able to impose themselves.
They definitely are, yeah. They just need probably a couple of more lads like them, realistically. I kind of say, and we've chatted about Colm Spillane before, if they could play him in 2 or 3 different positions in defence, I'm sure they would. They'd probably play him, if they could, they'd probably play him, 2 and 6 probably if they could, because he's just a real... he's really, really imposing presence, and there's no nonsense about him either. And that's probably, you probably couldn't say that about enough of the Cork backs, that they don't just get about their business in that kind of manner, whereas he does. And in fairness, Owen Cadigan definitely does as well. And then when you're talking about no nonsense defenders and no nonsense players, I think Dottie Burke would have to be top of your list in Galway. And there was a couple of them with Galway. When Galway won the All-Ireland in 17 and even in 18, the thing that was built up was there's almost like these unstoppable giants, and Dottie Burke was one of these that kind of created this kind of mythical thing about the team, almost that you couldn't get at them or you couldn't break them down. Such a physically imposing presence at the edge of the square. Never forget in 18, I think it was Luke Scannon's debut for Kilkenny. He got a ball and turned into Dottie Burke. Now it was probably high, and it was probably maybe more than a yellow. But like the same as I was saying earlier about Tommy Doyle, like you're not going to come in around there again.
Yeah.
When lads are doing things like that, you just won't. It's not that lads are it's a sign of timidness from anyone. But if you know you're going to get absolutely poleaxed by a lad, and he's just not going to let you in, and he's going to do everything to stop you, it's kind of such a deterrent, even subconsciously. So Dahi Burke would definitely be up high in the conversation, and Gerard McInerney as well. Like the big problem with Galway was probably why they hadn't won All Ireland. Was probably 3 and 6 and was probably nailing down those positions. And in Dahi Burke at 3 and McInerney at 6, they have two really strong players that they're going to be very, very hard for an opposition team to get at. One of the reasons Limerick won the All Ireland in 18 was probably that McInerney was carrying the knock into the 18 final and just probably wasn't himself in the final.
Yeah, true. And like even Tipperary last year, the fact that Ronan Maher was fullback and Paddy was, give or take, centre back as well. You have a fairly hard spine there. We've mentioned Limerick, like Mike Casey's well able to look after himself. Declan Hannon, interestingly enough, you wouldn't think of him as the most physical, and he does get kind of knocks now and again, and he misses out on games. But obviously, their two wing backs are absolutely massive, and Dan Morrissey and Dermot Burns. I'm sure plenty of people should feel they're in this conversation too. Just back to Galway also, as we were looking through the team, I think it both dawned on us quick enough that Conor Whelan has to be in this conversation. Because he's a bear, he's a bull, he'll go through you. He can go around you because he's so pacey, but he's a real won't back down sort of a physical player. So, and like he's good in the air as well as on the ground. So I think every which way he has you, and the way he so forcefully goes at you, I think he has to be in this conversation.
Yeah, Conor Whelan's one of these lads that can kind of play anyway. He has the pace for you, he has the skill for you, he probably has the strength for you as well. There's something about this as well. I always think you look bigger and stronger when you pull your socks up. I don't know what it is. I just think you look bigger and stronger, more imposing when you have your socks pulled up. You look like you have a big, chunky, strong pair of legs in you, and I just think you look kind of bigger. Have you ever come across that? Is there anyone even that plays a cool or anything like that pulls their socks up and you think this lad's an absolute brute? If he had his socks pulled down around his ankles, you probably wouldn't be thinking that at all.
I do know what you mean. It does kind of make the legs stand out a little bit more. Off the top of my head, who does it? Oh geez, there must be a load of people out there who do it, and get the comments in and let us know. I think TJ Reid does it sometimes, and
yeah, he does. He always does it. Yeah, he always does it.
But if someone is awkward looking and they have the socks up, I think they look twice as bad again. I think it actually looks brutal. And feel free to tag your friends in this who actually subscribe to that sort of thing. So we're agreeing then on Dahi, Grode McInerney and Conor Whelan as candidates from Galway. Did we go to Kilkenny yet? I don't think we did. Wally Walsh definitely. And I think Colin Fennelly, another guy who goes through the world of punishment. Like, he goes at you, and he has the whole defence converging and looking to take a pound of flesh out of him. But he keeps going and going and going. Won an All-Star last year, I'd say by virtue of getting killed so many times going through for Kilkenny and setting up scores. I think he'd have to be in there, because realistically, who wants a piece of that man? I don't think there's too many.
Yeah, I know you'd be an advocate for Lee Chin as well in this conversation. And it's not necessarily, a lad that's absolutely upending lads, but like Chin and Fennelly are definitely the same in the sense that when they get the ball, the handy option is never taken. The first thought that comes into their head is break a tackle. Same as Paddy Maher. If you look at Colin Fennelly was wiped in the All-Ireland semi-final last year. He was off the field at the end of the game, because when you get the ball, and nearly every time you get the ball, you're taking on lads, like that really takes it out of you. That really takes it out of you, and it's a phenomenal thing for the likes of Fennelly and even for Lee Chin to be able to do that for 70 minutes. It's a different type of hardiness, I would say, than the lad that's delivering big shoulders. But Wexford kind of have a nice little balance. As counties go, I'd say you probably won't find as many hard men in any county as you will in Wexford. We go down through it here, like Matt O'Hanlon, often given the man marking job anytime to play against Kilkenny, to man mark TJ Reid. Like, so he just won't go away, really. He gets
the toughest job against every county. He always gets Joe Canning, has done for years. Played against John McGrath last year against Tipperary and kept him pretty quiet. Actually did his knee in that game and was out for several months, but played on anyway. So I definitely think he's in the conversation. And Liam Ryan, a very forceful fullback too, who likes to impose himself.
Yeah, there was. I remember when Liam Ryan marked Fennelly in the 2017 Leinster semi-final. Now Fennelly probably got the better of him that day, but like Liam Ryan refused to let him go past him when he got the ball. He just would not let him go past him, and he ended up dragging him down a couple of times. But he's a real physical force and can obviously match the skill with that as well and get forward and get that point he got against Tipperary in the All-Ireland semi-final last year. He's some of them here, like you're looking at Liam Ryan, Dahi Burke, probably real old school kind of fullbacks, even Owen Cadigan as well. That old school kind of thou shall not pass in the full back line. We mentioned Lee Chin. Jack O'Connor's probably one up in the attack as well. He's probably seen a couple of too many red cards probably for my liking, but he's a big physical kind of force as well.
Okay, we're definitely we're coming close now to going through all the counties, and look, there's probably a few counties we've missed out on a little bit further down the pecking order, Joe McDonough and so on. So please let us know. Dublin, I think Owen O'Donnell, he's definitely very abrasive. Actually, in a Liam Ryan sort of a fashion. Chris Crummy, huge guy. There's a lot of good big guys in that Dublin team that won't back down. Like I even remember in 2018 when Dublin were after coming back from a couple of bad seasons. Pat Gilroy took them over. They were lacking a bit of quality, and they were beaten by Kilkenny by a point in that Leinster Championship game. Remember, Liam Blanchfield fouled Paddy Smith, who was coming out with the ball at the end, turns it around and ends up in the Kilkenny goal. So they were kind of robbed that day, I felt. But by God, they'd never back down at all physically in that game. Like Liam Rush is a big guy, injured an awful lot lately. But physically, these guys do leave it out all out in the field, I think.
Without a doubt, and when you're playing the majority of your games in Parnell Park as well, and championship games sometimes in Parnell Park, like very hard to get away from Owen O'Donnell in Parnell Park. Very hard to get away from the physical power of Crummy. And you know, when Dublin need an out ball up in the attack, Keeney is often that kind of out ball. Like he was an absolute wrecking ball last year against Galway in that round robin match where they knocked Galway out of Leinster and got an All-Ireland preliminary quarter-final place out of it. So you're looking at those three kind of big lads. Now if we're talking about, you know, the more skillful, I'm not too sure how many Dublin lads come into the conversation. When you're talking about like hard men, they definitely have a few that come into the conversation.
Who are we going to go for then? I think we've gone through the long list. Who are we going to go for? I think we're probably looking at the likes of Dahi Burke, Will O'Donoghue, Paddy Maher. Help me out here. There's definitely a few of those Wexford boys there as well. I think maybe Lee Chin is in the conversation for me. Anyone else?
Yeah, Liam Ryan will come into the conversation for me as well. But I think when push comes to shove, and I still think he's a good age that he could have another 5 or 6 years at a county level, and his exploits with Cara Finn as well, when you see what he can do on the football field as well, it'd probably be Dahi Burke for me. Just the solution to a problem position for Galway, and I find it hard to see when he has been trumped over the last couple of years. They try and put in a quick player on him, and he can tend to swallow up some of those quick players. You put in a physical player on Dahi Burke, it invariably won't work. He was on one leg when he marked John Conlon in the All-Ireland semi-final in 2018, and that was really the only time I've really seen him in any great trouble in recent years. And I just think, like, if you get a ball and you're staring down on the Galway defence and Dahi Burke is in front of you, I just don't think you're going to pass him.
Yeah,
unless you're doing something really, really special. So for me, and I think, and maybe the football is one of the things that's kind of rubbed off. And I was having this conversation with someone recently. Hurlers that only play hurling, I don't think that helps them, to be honest with you. I think if you play a bit of football and you're used to, without being smart, you're just used to being slapped and you're used to that physical contact. Sometimes you play hurling matches or you could train for a good while and there mightn't be much physical contact in it. If you throw a bit of football into the mix as well, you're just getting that, like, those little dunts that really set you back, and your body builds up a resistance for them. He's obviously been playing football with Cara Finn at a high level for a long, long time, and he just brings that hard football edge to hurling, and he'd be the hardest man for me.
Yeah, do you know what? That's fair enough. I think it's a really marginal call between him and Will O'Donoghue. That would be my top two here, and I'm not taking anything away from Dahi Burke by going more so with Will O'Donoghue. You know, and I'll say Shane O'Donnell, he was able to walk in for that goal, and you know, Maisie sold it through the Galway defence for that goal where he eventually whipped it into the net in 2018. I mean, with the whole thou shalt not pass up the centre of defence, I don't know if that should be happening. I think Oisin O'Rourke had a good game against him in Leinster last year, that small little nippy type of player that you talked about, and obviously the Conlon thing. But he did kind of shut down Seamus Callan at key times in All-Ireland semi-finals, and most players can't do that at all. And it basically transformed Galway into All-Ireland winners by putting him into full back. So by all means, I'm almost right there with you. But I think something about Will O'Donoghue, in a team of giants, that he just stands out as an enforcer. And I even look at the league game at the start of 2020 when Tipperary were absolutely bossing Limerick, and he comes on and he really just changed the game very quickly, involved in setting up a couple of goals, ended up getting himself red carded, which is obviously not something that adds to a hard man, but it was 2 yellow cards. But I just think whatever it is about him, he's just so forceful. His hurling is always very intelligent, he gives the ball off, he knows what he's good at. So I think that any guy who can stand out as an enforcer in a team full of giants, it'd have to be them for me.
Different type of enforcer as well. Burke's at the edge of the square, so it's a different type of enforcer he's doing there. When you can come into a game like that, and you obviously could probably get the chance to have more of an impact on the game because the ball is going to be floating around the middle a bit more. And he's just sort of a lad, you're right. He kind of just, in a team of giants, he does kind of just stand out. And he is their enforcer really as well. He'd definitely be in the top 3 for me. I'd definitely have Paddy Maher high in that conversation as well. So it'd probably be in this order, probably be Dottie Burke 1, Paddy Maher 2, Will O'Donoghue 3 for me.
Okay, right, well that's it. Let us know if you think somebody else deserves to be top of the list or that we didn't discuss at all. Let us know. Brought to you by 65hurls.com. Go there and pick up your sticks. We'll chat to you again.